In my role as a chaplain at the local hospice, we are prepared to walk the path with people that are there for life-limiting illnesses. And in the process of doing that, we are often asked to prepare a funeral service. Often in that process, we get asked to produce a ceremony which is sometimes called a humanist service. Humanists tend to be less responding to religious tracts and information of God in their ceremonies, and so what we would produce would be something along the lines of inclusions of poetry, inclusions of modern music, inclusions sometimes of hymns, because a lot of people have been brought up with hymns and they like their hymns. It's a process that the patient and or the relatives would be happy with, that there is no God in the ceremony, and as a consequence, therefore, they're comfortable with the process of saying farewell to their loved ones. Today, coffin adornments are moving away from decorative pieces being applied to them, and instead people are looking for plainer coffins. And that was so in the early days of funerals. We go back before the Victorian era, where coffins would generally be quite plain. They would probably have been made in the local estate's wood mill, and the deceased would have been carried to church on the shoulders of their friends and neighbours, resting at the lich gate to clear the mud off their shoes, and then carried into church for the ceremony. But as we progressed through the Victorian era, things got a little bit more managed and a little bit more decorative. It was becoming common, for example, to lay your loved one out in the front room for people and friends to come along and pay their respects. And on those occasions, it needed to be a coffin that looked nice and maybe even showed off the amount of money that you could put together. And then the progression went on into modern day. But now we see a lot of people actually looking for things like wicker baskets or cardboard boxes for burial. And the adornments, brass handles and fancy woodwork, is slowly disappearing, although still sort of. And these are the way that things have moved on, and like business and commerce in so many ways builds up and recedes, so it has been in the funeral industry in the amount of decoration that coffins have required. We provide services for anybody and everybody. Chaplains do not necessarily look at people to have a faith, or no faith, or any faith. And as a consequence of that, the number of services that we produce and the mixtures of services and ceremonies that we produce would be many and varied. And sometimes the coffin will be adorned in the traditional way, and other times we will see a wicker basket being used. And on occasions, I have conducted ceremonies where a cardboard box, properly constructed and for the purpose, cardboard box has been used, showing again that trend that I mentioned earlier about how things have changed in terms of ornate coffins, wood, through to where we are now.
And I'm just reminiscing about my brother, really. He died 20 years ago, and he was 53, so he was at the height of his life, really, at the time. And he died in the north of Scotland, where he lived, and I mean by the north, 12 miles from John O'Groats, so it was quite a long way away. I've got a picture of him here, actually. I don't know whether you want to see it. Just to show you him when we were very young. I was the little one in the middle there, so I was about 5, and my brother was 8 years older than me, and that was my sister. So when he died, it was a huge shock because it was very sudden, and it was a terrible shock to us. And we lived 600 miles away down here, so first of all the trauma was telling my parents that he died, and then we had to go up, pick my sister up on the way up, who lived near Dundee, and then go on up. So the journey in itself was quite a long thing. So by the time we got there, we were geared up for a funeral, but what we weren't geared up was for the traditions of a Scottish funeral. very hard, very Anglican, but rather Presbyterian. I was quite surprised to see that my brother had actually been left in church overnight, which was obviously the tradition years and years ago here, but there he actually was overnight in the church, and we went the next day to the actual funeral, which was a big funeral. And after that, we all went to the village where they lived, which was about 5 miles away, in a huge funeral cortege, because it was a big funeral. But when we got to the churchyard where he was going to be buried, the entire village male population was waiting at the churchyard, and I'm talking probably 100 people, 100 men there. And when we went in, obviously, with a coffin, what was unusual, and again I didn't find this out till afterwards, was there was no women. We, as sister, widow and daughters, were the only women in the churchyard. So that was quite, well, moving in itself, that actually we were there against what turned out to be a tradition of the time. But the other tradition that comes on there, very Scottish, was the coffin is taken over the hole, and they're the cords, and they're really ribbons, but as the coffin is lowered, they're held by ribbons. Now, what happened was the undertaker said cord number 1, cord number 2, cord number 3, and there were 6 cords in all, and a person chosen by the widow, it was high honour. My husband was, as brother-in-law, was actually holding one of the cords, which was a wonderful honour, really, and this seemed to be, my sister was amazingly probably unique in helping my father hold a cord. So as cord number 1 came forward, it was his son, and then cord number 2, which was my sister with my father, cord number 3 was my brother, my husband, and so on to the 6 cords, and then the coffin is lowered by these people. So it's quite a solemn, serious occasion, and very, very moving in actual fact, as it happened. So that's what happened there, and then, you know, we after the service, then we went off to the wake. So the next day, as I say, we went up to John O'Groats, and one of the wreaths at the funeral was from a ship called the Pentland Venture. And it turned out that the Pentland Venture was a ferry to the Orkneys, and it actually arrived while we were there. And my sister, being my sister, went over and said to them, "Thank you for the wreath, you know, who I am and all the rest of it." And they said, "Come with us over to the Orkneys, just as our special guests," which is what we did. We went with my mum and dad. I'm going to get all upset about this now. We went with my mum and dad over to the Orkneys on the bridge of the boat. My father took the, the wheel. And it was a very, very special family goodbye. Sister, myself, and my mum and dad. Those are the main people. I have got a photograph. I don't know whether you want to see it or not, but it's actually quite nice to see us on the boat there. You can see that's the captain who'd actually asked us across, and my father at the wheel, and there's my mum, because it was very special for them. You know, my father had been stationed up there in the war, so it was even more significant. So that was really, we went over to the Orkneys, touched land and came back. But my brother would have been laughing his socks off, and we thought of it, because there's quite a current up there at Scapa Flow, and the boat went up and down, and my sister and myself and my husband was sick over the side, and we just said, "Oh, David will be just laughing at this right now," and that was our, like, "Hi, goodbye," you know, and I'm off now sort of thing. So that was really, I think I'm probably saying this because I think a lot of other families actually have similar experiences where it's not just necessarily the service where you say goodbye, but it's actually some sort of a special. It might be taking the ashes, you know, and scattering the ashes at sea or over a special piece of land, but something that is very, very personal to the people concerned, to say goodbye in their own special way.